Thanks. So interestingly, I have a little bit of a past with Ning. It was, I don't know how many years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, where Mark and Gina took me out to lunch somewhere here in Palo Alto and tried to pitch me on the idea of a company called 24-Hour Laundry. So everybody remember that? No? Anybody here from those days? Yes? Okay. Couple? No? So the pitch Mark gave me is like, he said, I think one of the things that's really working is this really crappy design. If you look at Craigslist and MySpace, these sites are really taking off. So we want to have this bare bones, really crappy looking product type thing. I don't know if they actually went off and did that. What I see today is not like that, but hey. So anyway, that's my short interlude, and I'll stop giving you guys personal history lessons. Instead, what I want to talk about is this idea of mobile first. But before I do that, I want to ask you guys a question. Does anybody have one of these Cupertino iPhone thingies with them? Anyone? 2 of you? Okay, so like 3 or 4. What about those googly Android things? Okay, so there's some developers in the audience. That's good. Anybody carrying around a BlackBerry? Okay. Okay. Interesting. How about a Nokia? All right, no one from Europe is here. That's interesting. What about a Windows Phone Series 7 Edition 2001? Sorry, I don't know what their branding is like these days, but it's some long combination. Nothing? Nobody? Okay. I sort of have to throw this in because I give this little survey in lots of places throughout the world. And it's really interesting to see how it changes by region. But there was 2 or 3 times where some guy in the back is like, what about Windows Phone? Right? So like Microsoft stooge planted in the audience. And so now I circumvent that so that their costs for sending that person to the conference are nullified. Okay, me personally, I'm one of these iPhone people, complete with all the smugness that comes with that. And I'm also on the Twitters. So anything that I talk about here, complete with smugness or whatnot, if you have any questions about it, you can send me a question, follow up, or I also talk a lot about mobile stuff on the Twitters, and you can keep up with that. So what's this idea of mobile first? Well, it's actually a pretty simple thing, which is just basically software that we're building for the web and for the internet in general should currently be thought of for mobile before we think about it for sort of our big picture cousins. And why this is a little bit different is because traditionally it's sort of the opposite. Right? For many, many years, if people thought about mobile at all, they thought about it secondarily, and even if they did think about it, it was sort of painful. But things have changed so dramatically these days that I think that becomes really a backwards way of thinking about how we design and develop software, especially on the internet. I'm not the only one who is preaching this. A couple years ago, I was the only one who was preaching this, and I looked really weird. But now there's people like, actually I should change that to Google chairman now. He's changed his role. But when he was CEO, Eric Schmidt was out there talking about mobile first. And because programmers want to do it, Google will do it, which is sort of how everything runs at Google, if you've ever been over there. This is my friend Kate. She heads up design over at Facebook, and she has a very similar approach, going mobile first, desktop second for a lot of things that they're doing. Kevin Lynch, CTO of Adobe, when they did the Adobe Max keynote, sort of got up on stage and showed some data that I'll show a little bit later. It was talking about this giant shift where we're moving from what used to be a personal computer to what is actually a personal computer. And he's also talking about mobile first. But I don't think you should do things just because people who make a lot more money than you or me say we should do them. I'm going to try and give you guys real reasons behind it, and then we can discuss whether or not it makes sense. So the real reasons I want to talk about are threefold. The first one is there's really tremendous growth in this space, which opens up all kinds of opportunities, either for you or people who are trying to do something similar to you. Right? And whoever takes advantage of that opportunity first ultimately gets the spoils, if you will. Mobile, despite changing an awful lot, changing every couple months, is still actually a very constrained discipline and domain and area to interact and design on. So that forces us to focus, which is great. And while there's these limitations that force us to focus, there's also a lot of new capabilities in these devices that we have within our pockets all the time that allow us to think about things differently. So that opens up new ways of thinking of solving people's problems. So first one, I'll show a little bit of data and I'll ground it, but I happen to like numbers, and I particularly like the numbers that came out of this Morgan Stanley research back in, I guess it was 2 or so years ago, and they sort of show these computing cycles, right? The personal computer, the desktop internet, the mobile consumer, and what you see essentially is pretty big increase, right? It's an order of magnitude increase of the number of devices that people actually have. Now, does anybody know the maths out here? Anybody? Math? Notice anything funny about this number, those of you who know maths? Larger than the population of the world. Right, yeah. So in the world, there's a little like, what, 6.7 billion right now? And what they're projecting is there are going to be more mobile devices connected to the internet than there are people in the world. Does anybody have a smartphone? Do you have a laptop? Do you have a connected TV, like a set-top box? PlayStation 3, Wii, tablet, Kindle? Now you really quickly start to see how these things start to happen. Now what's actually most interesting is just the way every single appliance has a LED clock, whether it needs it or not. It's actually, this is a fascinating thing I learned from my friend Tom Coates. It's actually cheaper to put an LED clock in electronics than to take it out, based on the way all that manufacturing is sort of set up now, right? So this is why every single appliance you buy has a clock, whether it needs it or not. And as the cost of adding internet access to a piece of electronics keeps going down, 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 we'll hit a point where it's cheaper to have something connected to the internet than isn't connected to the internet. And that starts to create some really interesting opportunities. So there's this growth, and it's happening really, really fast. And I'll highlight that in a little bit. But it's not just big numbers. There's actual real business happening. If anybody's been keeping up with mobile over the years, it's always been next big thing, right? It's one of these 3 to 5 year out things, like speech recognition, like bendable LED displays. 3 years, it'll be here. But there's actual real business happening. Amazon, $1 billion in a year. eBay, $2 billion off a single iPhone app. What's actually really interesting about eBay is they control 50% of mobile commerce in the US right now. 70% of that happens off their one iPhone app. Right, so when you see people with this strategy of, oh, we're just going to build an iOS app, and everybody that uses Android devices is like, oh, you suck. Well, there's actually real reasons why people do these kinds of things, right? Single app, 70% of 50% of commerce in the US. Even mobile web use, Best Buy doubling every year over and over again. So that's commerce. Then everything, especially what Ning is doing, probably falls in this category, social. The stat I love the most about this is the largest social network in Japan, Mixi. 4.5 years ago, 14% of their page views were on mobile devices. Today, 85% of their page views are on mobile devices. And if you sort of look at that example as where we're headed, then you can start to really see the impact of why thinking about mobile before you think about other things makes a lot of sense, when 85% of your activity is happening through that platform. And then there's all sorts of other things, search, music, email, you name it. But you don't need to have all these statistics. I'm just going to give you the one statistic that I think really illustrates this story better than anything else. In that Morgan Stanley research, they made this bold prediction that at the end, or sometime in 2012, E stands for estimate, not end, I have to keep reminding myself, the number of the total global shipments of netbooks, desktops, and laptops is going to get surpassed by the number of global shipments of smartphones, which is this huge, big deal, right? All of a sudden, more and more people are going to be accessing data, information, services, applications, utilizing a smartphone than desktop, laptop, notebook. So I made this big prediction. Everybody got all flustered. It actually happened 2 years earlier, at the end of 2010. Right? And this, I think, really just illustrates what's going on in mobile. Many, many large-scale predictions and sort of industry-changing stuff is being discussed, and all of it is happening faster and faster than people are predicting. I mean, this is a 2-year difference. This is huge, right? So if you remember anything, remember that stat. And you can already see, well, what's the impact of this? The impact of this, you already start to see a shift in usage. And so between 2008 and 2010, home usage of quote-unquote personal computers is down 20%. And in this study from ComScore, they tried to figure out why that was, and they put the blame on the increased use of smartphones and tablets to get things done throughout the day. Right? And this is very, very early. This is in the US. In the US, 35% smartphone penetration right now, 38% depending on where you look. And you're already seeing these kinds of changes. I think the reason why you're seeing these sorts of changes is because that crusty thing underneath the desk that you blast with an air can every now and then, that is not the personal computer. The personal computer is the thing that's in your pocket, knows where you are, is aware of your environment, is connected to the network at all times, and you can use anywhere and everywhere, right? It's a much, much more personal computing device than the air can blasting tower underneath your desk at home. And you're also seeing this shift happen in services that people use. So this is not specific to Gmail. This is specific to all web-based email sites. But visitors to web-based email sites in the browser dropped 7% towards the end of 2010, whereas on mobile devices it popped 36%. So very early, but you're already seeing this shift in usage, right? Moving from getting things done when you're at the desk, when you're at the cafe, when you got your laptop open, to getting things done instantly by pulling something out of your pocket that's connected to the network. But it's not just a shift of usage. There's actually new kinds of usage happening too. So Yelp, who's got about, 45 million uniques around the world or so, 7% of their total audience uses the service on mobile devices, but that 7% of the audience is responsible for over 30% of their total searches. And if you dig a little bit deeper, this is another one of those iOS sort of businessy tidbits. 4% of their total user base uses the iPhone app, and they're responsible for somewhere around 27% of total searches. Right, so there's this real, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? Imbalance in where activity happens, and this is why people focus in particular places. But this is all new use, and there's other new use too. So on their mobile devices, every other second somebody calls a local business on Yelp, somebody generates driving directions. These are totally new opportunities for them. Zillow, real estate service. On mobile devices, people are in the neighborhoods where they want to buy a house accessing information. That's a totally different audience, opportunity, business, everything than somebody researching things on their desktop at home. So what do they do with this new opportunity? And the other additional usage that comes, so there's about 250 million active Facebook users on mobile. The people who use Facebook on mobile use it twice as much on the desktop than people who don't use it on mobile. So not only a shift in usage, but lots of new usage emerging as well. And those of you that are astute may say, well, isn't all of this stuff actually happening on mobile applications, right? Isn't this all native app sort of things? I've been sort of alluding to these iPhone app deals. And people get into these debates. So when you're twittering on the Twitter client on your latest Nexus S Android phone or what have you, you're using a native app, right? And it's true, lots of activity on Twitter happens on mobile. 40% of all new content happens on there. More surprisingly, 16% of people actually start, meaning they join, using the service on mobile, which nobody ever thought of before. And that's actually a recurring theme that comes up here. Stuff you think people won't do on mobile devices because they're on the small screen, they actually will do. And over again, I personally and others I talk to get surprised by the types of things people are willing to do on their phone. Somebody bought a $520,000 jet on the eBay iPhone app, right? So people will do all kinds of things. So given that there's all this mobile activity on Twitter, what do you guys think are the top 2 Twitter mobile experiences? Hootsuite, okay. The web, mobile web. Cell phone. Well, yeah, they're all on a phone. Any other ideas? Twitter app on just in general on the iPhone. Okay. So, in actuality, your first answer is correct. The majority of content of activity is still happening on their mobile web experience, then SMS, then Twitter on the iPhone, Twitter on the BlackBerry. Right, so while we have this assumption that everything is sort of happening inside of these native applications, there's a lot more mobile activity that's happening across the browser as well. And what actually happens is there's just all these interesting tales under the surface. More use of native applications actually drives more use of the web. Because let's say you are using a native Twitter client on your Android phone and somebody shares a link, what does that go to? It goes to the web browser. So the more you use that Twitter client, the more you're going to use the web browser because the more you're going to click through links. Right? And so everything is growing. If you look at all the studies, basically both things are growing in parallel, and Nielsen and ComScore both show the mobile browser growing like 1 or 2% more. and triple-digit growth in mobile web browser usage. So this is kind of the big story on why the web actually matters on mobile first, right? If and how we look at that statistic from Japan, 14% versus 85% of page views, very, very shortly, people are going to be using mobile devices to access any kind of internet software more than they use the desktop, laptop, notebook. In fact, last year, we had 600% growth in traffic to mobile websites. That was last year. Wait till you see what happens this year. And people say, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me. Well, the average smartphone user sees 24 different websites a day, and the top 50 websites, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, only constitute 40% of that. So what that means is all of this activity is likely to hit everybody and anybody who's on the web, right? Increasingly. And even Opera Mini, which tries to make things better on feature phones, has triple-digit growth. So there's this opportunity to take advantage of this growth, right? We're seeing this shift in usage from what used to be the personal computer to what actually is the personal computer. We're seeing new usage emerge, like I gave you the examples from Yelp and from Zillow. And we're also seeing a lot of usage of the web browser on mobile. And there's a huge opportunity to take advantage of that growth to not fall behind, remain relevant, give people a good experience. But the other part of that opportunity stems from more of the experience. So this is Mr. Joe Hewitt. He's the guy who made this app, which is the most popular iPhone application ever, the Facebook app. For a while there, it was locked in like heated combat between Facebook and Koi Pond, who's top of the App Store. One week, Koi Pond would kick Facebook's butt, and then the next week it comes struggling back, right? But I love this quote from him where he talks about the experience of doing this. At first, he was going to create a mobile companion, but he soon became convinced that it's possible to actually create something that's better than what existed on the quote-unquote big screen web experience. And so what I want to dig in the next section is, well, how do you do that? What are the things that actually enable you to create a better experience? What are the things that sort of tipped Joe into thinking, hey, this might be a better way to represent Facebook to people and allow them to interact with it? Hopefully I convinced you on the growth side of the story. If you don't remember any data, remember that PC versus smartphone thing. I think that is a big, big deal. So constraints. I'm one of these people who believes that constraints are actually very good for design. And in fact, a quote that I like to refer to often is, design is the art of gradually embracing constraints until sort of a elegant solution remains. So the more you figure out and frame the problem you're solving, the more that problem just sort of reveals a solution to you. And there's a lot of constraints that exist in mobile despite all the advances we're doing. A lot of them really deal with the ergonomics and the modes of use of the devices, right? They have to fit in our pockets. They have to be portable. They get used everywhere. So screen size is a constraint. The fact that we're using them everywhere limits networks. And we're out in the real world and at home and in all kinds of places using these things, which is also a design constraint. So screen size in particular, for many years, this was like hotly contested debate on the web and in software design in general, like how much screen space do we have? And people lost their lives. Some people lost limbs, but we gradually agreed this sort of is a good resolution to work with, 1024 by 768. Well, you take the first volley of smartphones that came out, the original iPhones, the first run of Android devices, Palm now, WebOSs, or HP now, formerly Palm WebOSs, and they clocked in at a pixel ratio, and we'll talk about what this means with screen density later, but 320 by 480 versus 1024 by 768. So 80% of the screen space that you had, gone. That means 80% of the content, of the interfaces, of the menus, of the links that you had on your web page doesn't have a home anymore, which I think is freaking awesome. Who doesn't want 80% of most web pages they visit to go away, right? Steve sort of tells us, hey, this is the way it has to be. But let's look at a real example. This is Southwest Airlines. And Southwest Airlines has used every single pixel. I think they have some white space here they could throw some shit into. So I can't believe somebody has not noticed that big hole. You could definitely throw, I don't know, some Lucky in Love Sweepstakes Part 2 up there. or ding, ding. This problem is the problem of the carp in the bathtub. You guys familiar with this? So you put a carp in the bathtub, and as long as you keep feeding it, it fills, gets as big as the space available to it. Same thing happens with these sorts of sites, right? There's space. Let's fill it with crap. And it's very easy to add things to a web page, so people do. Now, in order to show you the next thing, I actually have to... Anybody familiar with this concept called change blindness? Yeah? So change blindness is I show you two images that are kind of really similar, and they vary a little bit, and you don't notice the difference. You know what I mean? So keep that in mind, because I want to show you this and then show you the mobile experience on the iPhone, and I don't know if you can tell the difference. Everybody catch that? I know it's hard. But what's going on in here? Well, this is just a focus on what the heck does Southwest Airlines do and what do their customers want. Right? What they do is they sell reservations for cars and air. Customers want to check in on their flight, see when the flight's taking off and leaving, and the ones that are really loyal want to manage their rewards. And because they're mobile, maybe they get some, ding fare alerts or something like that. So this is how Southwest Airlines makes money and what their customers want to do, and nothing else. Right? All this other crap is gone because, frankly, there's no room for it. Again, I think this is fantastic because it really forces you to focus. You have to have this hard conversation with everybody that wants their thing on this homepage and say, well, is, Lucky in Love more important than flight check-in? No? Okay. And then when you get this prioritization, because you started with the mobile version first and you get everybody in a room and you use the constraint of how much screen space we have available to us to hone in on your priorities, then you can take that to any other experience, right? Put that on the tablet. Put that on the TV. This is our prioritized list of what matters. We all agreed. Why would that change just because there's more screen space? Shouldn't. And if Southwest Airlines had started with mobile first, maybe they would get something like this, which ironically was the Southwest Airlines website before they hired their new VP of marketing. That's just a theory. Sorry. If my humor's off, just tell me. Let's look at another example. So this is a photo sharing site called Flickr. And you may be familiar with it, but chances are you are not familiar with everything in Flickr. And over the years, Flickr has grown, right? And they've got about 60-something plus top-level options for things that you can do on the site. When they created their mobile web experience, though, they took that 60-plus options and got it down to 6 things. Recent activity, which you can access in 2 places. So that's what's happening with your photos, comments, favorites, things that your contacts are sharing. Want to kill some time to look at something interesting or photos near me. And that's it. So how do they go from 60-plus things down to the 6 that actually matter? Well, they have to know their audience. And what people on Flickr do is they go and see, has anybody interacted with my photos? Does anybody like what I'm putting up there? Have they commented, right? That is a very big use case. They want to see what their friends are sharing. And they got some time to kill, so they're just going to fart around and look at interesting photos or photos near them. So these really core use cases of how people use the product. They learn about their audience, and then they put that focus and that prioritization on that. Once again, the mobile version just sort of forces that to happen. You don't really have a choice because you have all these constraints. Now, those are sort of a big picture, here's what the site's all about examples. So I want to give you a small example. I fly relatively regularly, and this is the page on Expedia where I see what time my plane leaves. And this is the part of the page that actually has that information. If you were actually to do like a pixel percentage of what has the information on here, I believe it's like 1,000th of the screen space is devoted to actual useful information, and everything else should probably pixelate and die. Now, let's compare this example to the Expedia mobile app. And boom. When my flight's leaving, when it's arriving, I can move through it by date, I can move through it by itinerary, and here's the real kicker. If you just start this app, it has this little text that says, where should you be? Flip it and see. Use the accelerometer on the device. You flip it sideways, it says, get your butt over to Terminal B. Your flight's taking off in 25 minutes. Like, how much more different could these two experiences possibly be? Right? Here, compared to, whoop, right? Am I the only one who thinks this is a little different? And again, I think here we're actually seeing an example of a capability being used to help create a new kind of experience for a simple use case, right? Because they're using the accelerometer to change things up. So size of screen is a constraint. You lost 80% of the screen space. You have to focus and prioritize, and I think that's good across the board. Next is this idea of network, right? Does this happen to anybody? No? Yes. So because we're in varied circumstances, we don't necessarily have the best of connections, right? We're not connected to some big pipe underneath the desk, plugged into the wall or the DSL, what have you. So performance is really, really important on mobile. And there's many things you can do. I'm not going to get into this too far, but number one, send less stuff, whether it's number of HTTP requests or overall file size. There's new capabilities you can take advantage of. But all in all, in aggregate, what this means is making things really, really fast. And if you make things fast enough for mobile, guess what? They're going to just be flying when you get to the desktop. So another example of how you embrace this constraint of, okay, we have this network issue on mobile devices, connections aren't great, the overall speeds aren't that good. If we optimize for that by building or thinking about mobile first, then when we get to the desktop, things will be blazingly fast, which actually has really big returns. You look at just about any site that has ever studied performance, and every single time, things in the 100 millisecond delays range have a huge impact on stuff. In fact, Google recently did some long-term testing where they introduced a delay in search, and then they kept it there for 3 weeks. And and they took it away for 3 weeks. Even 3 weeks after they took it away, people were using the site less and less. Right? So these things have long-term user experience issues. And one of my biggest gripes about mobile applications, about native applications, is somehow they get a free pass on performance. Like it's totally okay if I wait 30 seconds for the freaking daily iPad app to show me a single story, but on the web we measure that in milliseconds. Right? And 30 seconds is being generous. I think they clocked the daily iPad app as something like 3 minutes and 50 seconds to show you a single news story. It's kind of absolutely unacceptable on the web. So performance is a big deal. If you do mobile first, you get it fast enough for the mobile device, it's going to be really, really darn fast on desktop. And then the other thing is really the overall modes of use. So I think there's a lot of times when people talk about mobile, there's this idea of mobile context, right, which is the circumstances under which people use things, and people get really hot and bothered about designing for context, and people debate what that means. I think it boils down to three things, each of which I'm talking about here. So one is there's different constraints on certain devices. There's different capabilities in different devices. And the third part is, on mobile, it is something that fits in your pocket, and you have it everywhere and anywhere. And that has a huge impact on design, right? The fact that you can pull it out right now while I'm talking, you can do something. You can't pull up your desk from your home and fire up the desktop PC unless you got some sort of cyborg MIT kind of outfit going on. And so the sort of personal computer at work, at home, or in the cafe is characterized by things like a big screen, always on power, consistent network, keyboard, mouse, chair, and the latest Apple accessory, the coffee mug, which you'll note really fits in with the same design aesthetic. Now, when you move to a mobile device, things change really dramatically, right? You have a very small screen because it has to fit in your hand. It's got a battery because it has to be portable. It has an inconsistent network we've talked about. Because there's not a lot of room and it's small, trying to turn the entire surface into an interactive object, we use our fingers to interact with it. It has sensors that are environmentally aware of where you are, where the device is, how it's positioned. And all these things really add up to a lot more of a personal experience, I think, than the desktop computer, right? We hold it in our hands. We use it with our fingers. It's aware of where we are. Or it's aware of how close to our ear it is. They have like light-dark sensors, all kinds of things. And then the other part of the conversation is, well, where are people using these devices? And the stereotypical image that people get of mobile use is like the business guy on the street trying to get to a meeting, or someone trying to find the address of a restaurant, right? Sort of the thing that pops into people's heads. But interestingly, most people use these devices at home. When's the last time you sat on the couch watching TV or a movie and you had your smartphone with you flipping through your email or Twitter, right? Everybody does it. And by the way, 39% of people say they use their smartphones in the bathroom, which means 61% of people are liars. You can read that statistic either way. But during miscellaneous times, waiting in lines, at work, right? And what this actually is it's just everywhere. People use this everywhere and anywhere. And that has a real big impact on how we design. And the other, I'll show you a little shwilly marketing video from Microsoft. So I think this illustrates this anywhere and everywhere. So you see, if you see something interesting, she can act on it right away, share it. He's got some time to kill, he's playing a little game. Later on, you'll see somebody checking sports scores or checking in on their financial information. But that's fake gameplay. Anyway, you ever see a commercial where someone's doing this? It's fake gameplay. But here she meets a friend, and she's going to quickly flip through some photos, right? So it's all these like small little interactions dispersed throughout the day. And you start to see this pop up in the actual data behind how people are using these devices. Oh, sorry. One last point I forgot I had inserted this slide. Because you can pull out a device like this anywhere and anywhere, chances are you're not in a cube, walls locked down, headphones on in a cafe or in your office at home, which means there's lots of stuff going on, and so people give us partial attention. Even if it's at home on the TV, chances are we got one thumb, one eyeball when we're doing design, right? Doing this kind of thing. So partial attention, focused design. Now, getting back to the when are we mobile. This is data from a service called Read It Later, which allows you to do just that. It allows you to read articles later, which for me means read articles never. But it's a good feeling. Some people actually are reading these articles later, and if you look at people using laptop and desktop computers, you see that they sleep, then gradually throughout the day they read things, then chances are they're eating dinner or taking a siesta, and then they read, and then they go back to sleep. But there's pretty clear patterns of time on the computer, and they're long periods, right? They're extended periods. Now contrast this to iPhone users. And what you can see with iPhone users is it's a lot spikier, and the bursts are sort of shorter, right? So it's still happening anytime, but in contrast to when people are using these other devices, the intervals are shorter and happening a little bit more irregularly. And this matches our behavior, right? We pull these things out for a little bit, we put them back. It gets really interesting when you look at a device like the iPad. And so when people are reading on the iPad is in the evening, on the couch, and in bed. I swear I'm reading web design articles. We'll see how this changes as these sort of tablet devices get used in the workday. Currently not a lot of activity there. It's sort of like my morning coffee, and then I'm going to read some things, watch a movie or what have you in the evening hours. But data like this is fascinating to me because it really does point out that the form factor of the device that you use to access the same exact service influences how you use that service, right? And you see this over and over again in data. Here's the comparison between desktop, laptop, and iPad. This is LinkedIn overall usage. This is LinkedIn mobile usage. I think I have a comparison of them. So it has a strange spike at the end of the day. What's happening? People are out like networking at events, meeting others, and exchanging contact information, looking up people they're going to meet. I don't know. I don't work there. Hopefully they have some kind of theory about what the heck's going on here. But it is, once again, really different usage, right? And so people debate all these theories about whether or not everybody should get the exact same experience across every single device. The most rigorous set of testing that I've been exposed to seeing has come from Netflix, which is all over every device. And every single time they claim to have tested this, they learn that no, the same experience everywhere is actually not good. In fact, customizing the experience to the devices works much better. And you start to see that in how people use stuff. So these modes of use, right? The fact that these devices are intensely personal, they're with us all the time, that they're used everywhere and anywhere, we can pull them out, and the types of time pattern usage that you see all influence how we think about designing stuff. I think the fact that these devices get used anywhere and everywhere throughout the day really grounds the way you design for them in real-world use cases. What do I mean by that? That sounds like some hokey-pokey UI talk. But I love this little comic by XKCD about university websites. It's like one of these things that is so true. It's funny because it's true kind of thing. So things that are on the front page: campus slideshow, alumni in the news, press releases, letter from the president, aka crap. Things that people actually want to see: campus address, academic calendar, usable campus map, what have you. Usually not on the homepage, right? And I was reading this article by somebody who was working on the mobile web experience for their university, and this image popped into his head, and he said, you know, looking at our current and planned content for the mobile site, this is all we have. We don't have any of this. And how did that happen? Why is that occurring? I think it's, my personal belief is, the constraints of thinking about the mobile experience, of thinking about the small screen sizes. You have to prioritize the stuff that people need. And then thinking about these modes of use. The fact that people are out in the real world, they're actually trying to get things done, they need the right kind of information, they have real use cases, pushes you to stuff that's actually usable. And once again, starting with mobile first, you get pushed over here, whereas if you start with something that has lots and lots of space, well, maybe you start filling it with all this kind of fluff. Maybe you have 15 departments coming at you saying, we need to have a tour of our facility on the homepage, right? And the president leaves a letter on the front. Nobody looks at this crap. This is all useless. Okay. Second part of the argument, there's constraints, limitations of the device. I think these are very good not only for design but for business, right? Small screens force us to prioritize what's on them. Low network connections force us to make things fast, and fast over and over is proven to be good on the internets. And then these modes of use force us to focus on real-world use cases where people can actually get value whenever and wherever they are. Last but not least is capabilities. And we talked about limitations. Now I want to talk about the new stuff that we can actually do. Very, very exciting. So one of these capabilities is touch. And I need to update this big time, I think, because I believe this is now 400,000 Android devices activated per day, and I think this number has almost doubled, and this one's like 120. So what we're seeing with touch is this big transition to lots and lots of devices that people can all of a sudden use with their fingers. And that, on the one hand, is a bit of a constraint because you have to think about, well, how can they use it with their fingers? But on the other hand, it's actually a really big opportunity. And people always ask, well, what about the things that do indirect manipulation, like the Blackberries and Nokias of the world? Well, all these guys are moving to touch-based interfaces as well. And in fact, looking at Nokia's sort of smartphone mix, you can see the transition that mobile is going through in general. Like, these guys still produce the largest number of devices in the world, although that's likely to be changing soon. And the dark green really shows just how much penetration touch-based interfaces have on mobile. And I think this is going to push it even further on Nokia's side because the Windows Phone UI is all touch-based. So touch is a big deal, which leads us to think about, well, how can we actually make things interactive on touch? I'm not going to spend too much time on this, actually. I want to jump more to the capabilities. But you got to be concerned about how big things are because we're using our fingers. The average human finger tip is somewhere between 8 to 10 millimeters, and I think the average human finger pad is somewhere between like 7 to 9 millimeters. I can give you the exact data if you want. But those physical constraints really determine how we make the UI, right? Because we have these digits that we need to use, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes with that. And what it usually amounts to is actually making things bigger than you're comfortable with. So though these buttons on YouTube's mobile web experience can look a little cartoonish, and many designers will look at them like, oh, that's kind of big. When you actually use this, you're very, very happy that they have made these things large enough to interact with, right? That they're using these sizes. Especially if you have a 2-year-old who needs to be calmed down now. You do not want to be fumbling around with little buttons. And even small things around touch target size can have an impact. So this is Quora's mobile web experience. It's a Q&A site for those of you not in Silicon Valley. Anybody notice a problem here? You try and log in and you cancel it out. Right? So touch target sizes are a big deal. And targets are one side of designing for touch. The other side is really designing on gestures. And again, this is something I'm going to go through quickly because I want to get to the other stuff. But part one is how do I make things touchable? Part two is what are the different ways people control things via touch? And we did an audit of all of these different platforms and found what are the common touch gestures available across all of them, rationalized them down to sort of a standard list of things. Tap it, double tap it. You can tap things with multiple fingers. Double tapping with multiple fingers is not really there. In most cases, you can move your fingertip across the surface or you can brush against it. And again, this one's got multiple finger use. This one, not so much. Pinching and spreading, you can do multi-finger splays and pans with that. And then a series of press gestures, hold down, tap somewhere, hold down, drag. A couple variations on rotate. I'm going through this fast. This is the part that's actually important. What we did is we took all these core gestures and we mapped them to things people actually want to do and looked at the standards in these platforms. Right? So, for example, something like changing mode, the majority of things, of platforms that support this, when you hold down, the icons will jiggle on the iPhone, right? Or a folder will open up on WebOS or whatever, right? So there's this focused mode, and these are kind of the general patterns. So whether it's user actions, whether it's things like delete, duplicate, move, scroll, pan, scroll fast, what we've done is taken that thing that somebody wants to do, what the most common gesture is, and thrown it all together here. You can get it. This is why I'm going through it fast, because it's all on the interwebs. Okay? Now, what does this allow us to do as a capability? We're starting to see things finally begin to become expectations. So has anybody opened up an application or a web page and like pushed it down, expecting it to refresh itself? I'm seeing a couple nods. Right? At the beginning, this was totally undiscoverable. Nobody will ever figure out this feature. We can't rely on it. But people start to experiment with touch gestures. They do things, and over time, expectations get built. It's a slow process. It's a tedious process. But I'm a firm believer that ultimately, many of the things that are sort of undiscoverable now will become expectations later. Like, how discoverable is double-click? Oh, if I click it fast, real twice, something should happen, right? Nobody would ever think of that. Maybe on accident. But now, you double-click on all kinds of stuff expecting things to happen. Same thing's going to happen with touch, right? That's the graphical user interface paradigm. Now we're moving to touch-based paradigms, and similar things will happen. So things like drag to reveal, you see on Yahoo Mail. It's currently nice to use this stuff for like extra shortcuts and features that are a little bit maybe advanced or quicker access functions that are available on the email page, but you can shortcut to them by using a touch gesture here. You can also pull down to get search. Again, this is available elsewhere, but here's a nice little shortcut taking advantage of touch gestures. And because people don't know it, they give you a little bit of an overview. Some people do animations. They point these things out. But I'm a firm believer that the notion of touch and the way you can interact with content by directly manipulating it, right? You want to see what's in these photos? Move the list of photos. You want to move this down? Just take the whole list and with it. She's not touching a scroll bar. She's not clicking on a UI control. There's no button here. She wants to move the photo. She moves the photo over. Right? These are direct manipulations of content that sort of define this thinking of natural user interfaces. And why I'm really an advocate of this, you could take the label or not. I really don't care. I love the principles that are underneath here. Content is the UI. In that example with the iPad is absolutely what's happening here, right? Every interaction she has here is actual content. You want to see what a photo is? Touch the photo. You want to move the list of photos? Move the list of photos. No scroll bars, no buttons, no icons, no folders, none of this indirect manipulation stuff that we've been doing for years on the desktop. If you step back and think about how much of your life on the desktop is spent moving windows around and clicking on little X's and double-clicking on little folders and all this stuff that's an artifact of the graphical user interface, it's this layer between you and the stuff you actually want to interact with. But with the natural user interface, we get rid of that distance between the user and content as much as possible. We allow people to manipulate objects, and we try and do things that are rooted in real-world use. Because Bill Buxton, who's over at Microsoft, I really like the way he talks about this. He outlines natural user interfaces as taking advantage of things you already know how to do. So Microsoft has this product, I can't remember what it's called right now. It's like Rembrandt or something. But it's a touch screen this big, about the size of a canvas. And what they did at their Mix conference is they had artists, people who paint for a living, come in and start using this. And they were just using all the techniques that they use on the canvas on the computer screen. They didn't have to learn any Photoshop little icon menus or anything like this, right? Or all these different filters and pop open this dialog and enter some settings. They want to blur, they start blurring with 2 fingers. They want to swirl the color, they do this. They want to kind of push like this, they did that. So anyway, I'm super excited about this. And I think it's a challenge to people doing this sort of design and on mobile, but it's a big opportunity to innovate, right? So my friend Josh Clark lays it out kind of interestingly. It's all this graphical user interface stuff when you can directly manipulate content is still a bit of a hack, but we're in this weird intermediate state. And so things are kind of still invisible with gestures, although as I said, those expectations will come forward, so you need some cues, animations, what have you, but I strongly urge everybody to really push this forward. I don't think we've seen even the beginning of what interacting with software and with digital information and digital services through our sort of natural abilities actually means yet. Right? We're at the teeny little bit of this, ooh, I can pinch a photo to make it bigger. Right? That's sort of baby steps. And we can use this for like even small things. So, oops. Oh, here we go. So this is a really small little control that is optimized for touch. Now, traditionally, you can use a drop-down menu for this, which is a 4-tap action touch control. But with a little spinner control, you just go, and now it's at 2. Right? It's a touch target size control. Kayak only allows you to book 2 rooms. You can only fit 4 people in a room anyway, so this actually really optimizes interactions. Another capability shown on this Kayak form is location. So if I tap location, it can go and find where I am and give me hotels near me. And touch is a capability we can innovate with. I gave you my rant about that. Location is another huge capability that we can start to interact with. So on the desktop, in the web browser outside of like the 2 or 3 latest, we can know with 99% accuracy that you are in the United States. Go and design. You can't really do much with that, right? But on just any kind of mobile device these days, they use multiple things of this. Right? So with GPS, you can get down to 10 meters with Wi-Fi beacons, which is what something like the iPhone uses 2/3 or 3/4 of the time to locate itself. You can get down to 50 meters. You can start to do some really interesting things. Small things like this, or actually much bigger things as well. This is a service called Glimpse, and I use this all the time when I come home from work, because I send my wife a glimpse, and she can see exactly the route I'm on and how long it'll take me to get home. Right? Location information being used to solve a use case. And this is the general theme here. There's these new capabilities like precise location information. People have real-world needs and problems. And can we apply these new technologies to solving that? So I talked about multi-touch, I talked about location, but modern mobile devices have a ton of stuff in them. Right? I'm just gradually beginning to talk about just a few of them. And I'll talk about each of these, but not all of them. I'll talk about a few of them. But the general theme is, here's a capability. How can we change the experience of common use cases or people's needs? So one of the capabilities we have in these devices, it's not that often you take your laptop and flip it on its side, or your desktop computer. But if something can fit in your hand, you can move it all kinds of directions. And these devices can detect that through accelerometers. So when you flip the device over, you can change the UI. You can just make sure it works, or you can actually make the UI better. So this is Gmail on Android, and when I have it in vertical mode, I see all this. When I flip it to landscape mode, what it does is it gives me a big area to compose my email, gives me a larger keyboard, and moves the button up to the right. Now imagine if they had just kept the exact same layout in that mode. It would have made it a lot worse, right? I would have less room to type things. I'd have these tiny controls. I couldn't see what I'm doing. But instead, they took this adjustment as an opportunity to create a better experience. There's a notebook, or netbook, or whatever you want to call this thing, called the Little. And it has the swivel mode that it can detect and send to the software that runs on it. So if you flip the Little into easel mode, and you are a cooking website, how would you change your interface? Has anybody tried to cook from a recipe on a website and you've got your laptop sort of perched on the counter in the kitchen? Right? And then you have your fingers covered in sauce and you're trying to click the things. So we built a really fun thing in my innovation team that I had at Yahoo that created a gesture-based control. using the camera on a laptop. So when you had a cooking recipe, you could just sort of swipe to move between things, and that way you'd only splatter grease on the screen rather than getting it on the keyboard. Radical innovations like transference of mess. What about if you're a how-to site, right? How do you change the interface if somebody flips something into easel mode? Even like the most boring task of all on the internet, reading an article. What could be more boring than reading an article? Well, take something like the accelerometer, and what Instapaper does here, and I hope this is going to play without me going over there. Yeah, it gives you this tilt scrolling mode. So all you have to do is tip the device a little bit, and it'll scroll so you can read it at your own pace. If you missed something, you can go back, and that'll scroll up. You can still use your finger if you want to move through it, but you don't even have to touch the screen. You just sort of gently rock the device to the speed at which you want to use an article, read an article. And this is like the most boring task, period, right? Reading. Who would have thought you can innovate reading text on the web outside of getting rid of all the shit around it, which is what all these little services like Readability and Instapaper do for you. Here's another little example. Using the accelerometer in the web browser, you can make a snow globe. This is a silly little example, but the reason why I like this example, you know how to use this. You know why? Because you know how to use a snow globe. How to use a snow globe, you shake it. So this is actually a natural user interface. Takes skills you already know, applies them to something digital. This is and I'm showing things in the web browser and in native apps just to show you that you can do things in both instances on the web. This is using the gyroscope in an iPhone 4 to pan an image 360 degrees in the web browser. So what you do is you just move I'm not moving the device, obviously, right? I just kind of capture the content. But you move the device however you want, and it pans a 360-degree image to whichever way you want to look at it, just by moving the device around, which is pretty neat. So we have location detection, but we also have something like direction detection. Once again, I'm going to repeat my theme so it doesn't sound like I'm ranting up here. Capabilities can be used to transform experiences in new ways, even for the most basic stuff like reading an article. So we know through location detection, I showed you that table, where you are, but we also know through digital compasses and magnimeters in many smartphones the direction you're facing. So where you are in the world and the direction you're facing, which we can use to really transform experiences. So I was in London recently, and I knew I wanted to take in a couple sites. I knew the best way to do that would be to take the tube. So I pull open my laptop, I open up the Google, I type London Underground, I end up on their website. I find the link tube map because it's blue, there's a lot of white space, somebody designed this, I click on it. They've done some more nice usability things. There's an image which looks like a map, so I go there. They're telling me it's a PDF, they tell me how big it'll be. Right, a lot of sort of web design best practices in play here. Correct? I mean, people talk about this. Make sure there's a PDF there. Tell them how big it is. Use white space. I bet they thought about their IA a lot. It's not hard for me to go and find this map. And then I'm on the map, and now I can kind of find where I am and find the nearest tube station near me so I can go check out the sites, right? It's pretty much state-of-the-art in the desktop web. Now, let's look at that experience on my iPhone where I open up an app called Nearest Tube, and it overlays on my video camera view the nearest tube stations close to me. And it's sort of based on when I move, right? It uses that digital compass to change what it shows me. If I tilt it up, the accelerometer knows that I've changed the orientation of the device, and it now shows me more detailed information about the stations near me, including the routes they served, exactly how far away they are. And if I tilt it up higher, it now shows me stations that are a little bit further away, but again in this more detailed view. All right, so open the app. It overlays, based on my current position and perspective of the world, the information that I want. Both of these applications are solving the exact same use case. I want to find a tube station near me. And I'm not suggesting this crazy augmented reality one is necessarily better than the laptop one, because both of them, frankly, have some usability issues. But the thing that I hands down want to point out is, man, are these things different, right? Same use case, different technical capabilities, solution totally different. And I think personally, I actually like this one a little bit more than trying to find my way through a PDF map, right? And when we talk about things like augmented reality, there's a lot of hype, and frankly, a lot of these user interfaces are not very usable. We went and talked to Jeremy, who heads up Yelp, and they introduced this augmented reality view in Yelp as an Easter egg feature. You have to shake the phone 3 times to get it to show up. It was kind of crazy. But even though it was an Easter egg, they were kind of blown away by how much people actually use this and the sustained lift that they got from it. So there's something here. Right? I don't know what it is yet, but the idea of bringing you relevant digital information based on your current position and perspective in the world, that's huge. Let me just say that again because it sounds so awesome. Bringing you the most relevant digital information based on your current position and perspective of the world and overlaying it on your view of the world, I mean, hello, that's cool. What I showed you there was a native app, nearest to it, which gives you access to a number of things. On the web, we get half of that. But things are changing on the web, so don't get discouraged if you're mostly a web person as opposed to a native app person. HTML media capture, which Opera Mobile put up recently and is being contested for standards right now, gives you access to audio, image, and video capture. Device orientation recently made it out to Android. Gyroscope 360 degrees is an iPhone, iOS 4 and 5. So this stuff is coming to the browser, but if anybody who's worked on the web knows, the price you pay for access is you don't have as many capabilities. And it's just this classic tension between rich and reach. What we can do by being tied closer to the metal in native applications is always going to be more than what we can do on the web. Off the web, we can go anywhere. So good and bad. Now, we looked at using the camera port to sort of overlay information, but you can also use things like audio and video inputs to get in information. So you can scan something, and it'll tell you what you're looking at. It'll tell you how much it costs on the web. It'll tell you, the average reviews of it across the entire web. It'll give you a list of where it is near you, and you can look at that on a map and go and walk over there and buy it. You can also just take a picture of the darn thing. Why scan a barcode? And it'll get you the exact same information. Google and others have been really pushing QR codes, but they're moving to something new, which I'll talk about in a second. And Google sent 100,000 of the best business or the most popular businesses on Google Places little QR codes. You point your camera at them, and it tells you this is the restaurant, here's the menu, here's the average reviews, here's the phone number. Right? So you're kind of hanging out in the real world. You point your camera at something, and all of a sudden you have information about it. Like I said, Google's been kind of going crazy with this. So in Google Goggles, which is in the Google Search app on iPhone and on Android, you can scan a product, scan a label of wine. You can point it at a business card. It'll use OCR to scan in the text, enter it into your address book. You can point it at a work of art, and it'll identify it for you. So I have an art history degree, which is now useless. You can point it at a landmark, and it'll use the image and your location to identify it. So if you have a geography degree, I'm sorry. You can point it at foreign language text, and it'll, again, use OCR and translate it for you. So if you have a foreign language degree, I'm sorry. And in fact, this application called WordLens out there, you guys seen WordLens? This thing's just nuts. Not only will it translate the text, it'll put it back on the thing you're freaking looking at. Right? Same deal. This is the standard use case. I want to read text in a different language than mine. Think about how we can solve that on the desktop or the laptop, and now look at how we can solve it using the capabilities of these devices, right? All these different solutions that we get are not technology for technology's sake. They're actually looking at a real situation and saying, I have all these capabilities in front of me. How can I bring those to bear on this problem? This is a little favorite of mine. So this is Recognizer. You point it at somebody. It uses facial recognition technology to identify them and then gives you all the information about them on the internet. One of my favorite creepy quotes by now chairman of Google, Mr. Eric Schmidt, is, we have technology that can identify you with 7 photos. And that's not the creepy part. The creepy part is, he says, you don't think there's 7 photos of you on the internet? And by the way, Apple bought Polaroids for their facial recognition technology about close to 9-10 months ago. So we'll see what happens there. problem with a lot of this stuff, though, is you've got this small screen, and it's a really big world out there. And frankly, whenever you do this kind of thing, right, to call it point found, when I see somebody on the street like this, I say nerd found, because it's a very awkward interaction with these QR codes and with pointing your screen at stuff and scanning and snapping, which is why I think we're seeing a lot of people move to near-field communications and interacting with digital barcodes in the form of radio frequency ID tags. So radio frequency ID tag is essentially a little broadcasting like radio signal that costs about 7 cents a pop. And so when you move your phone with, in this case, an RFID reader near an object that has an RFID, it reads it and it can do whatever it wants. So when you put it near this car, it plays a cartoon of the car. When you put it near the hippo, it plays a cartoon of the hippo. And you can think of all kinds of use cases for this. Payments is what comes up the most, but checking in. When Facebook did their F8, they had these little RFID readers near their kegs and rooms, and you just put your phone near it, it checks you in using that signal. And Google's Nexus S phone that they released a little while ago, and now, I guess a day ago, they announced they're giving it away for free at Best Buy if you sign up for a 2-year contract. I guess apparently the Android numbers are not as big as they want it to be. That's another throwing these devices at you. Okay, so I talked about a couple of these. I haven't talked about all of them. I didn't even talk about dual cameras. I didn't talk about device connections. I didn't talk about proximity or ambient light. I barely touched on NFC. This is a tool set on mobile devices that we have available to us that, again, allows us to rethink common use cases and solve things differently. And when you think mobile first, you can go from a situation where, hey, I know 90%, 99% accuracy, you're in the United States, to, hey, I know where this person is about 50 meters. That totally changes how you can solve problems and how you can design. If you think of mobile as an afterthought, or you try and port what you have to the desktop over, none of these things are going to be considered as options in your toolkit. And so this is why I think this is kind of the third reason why mobile first makes a lot of sense, is that these capabilities that you have allow you to think about stuff very, very differently. So it's not just there's this big hockey stick of growth and this shift in usage from personal computers to the actual personal computer. It's not just that there's all these tight constraints that force you to focus because of screen size, network connections, and modes of use. It's also that there's all these capabilities that we now can take advantage of. Right? And I want to emphasize one more time, because people think I'm just hot and bothered by technology. It's not technology for technology's sake, right? Technology allows us to do things. People that just push things that are cool technically, that's all they end up being. But when you apply those things to stuff that people actually want to do or need to do, that's when stuff gets very, very interesting. And this is kind of the 1, 2, 3. If you're interested in more, happy to talk about it more. You can jump on the Twitters or my site. And I actually have written up all this in a book, which is in the editing and design phase right now, and hopefully coming out real soon. The book is half of why think about mobile first, and then the other half is really about how to go and apply all that stuff. So it's sort of a part 1, part 2 kind of thing. And happy to take questions about any of this or debate. Alex, yeah.
How do you get around gestures that are patented? I mean, a lot of these patterns are commonplace, but I would imagine that a lot of it's probably owned by Apple.
Yeah, it's not your problem if the device supports it, right? It becomes Google's problem if they support pinch and expand. If they do the little stretch and expand gestures, you can use it if it's available in their SDK, if they get sued. So. I don't know how that actually ended up. I remember that being in the press for a while, that Google couldn't use that, but now those things are in there, so maybe they settled it, or I don't know. Yeah.
What happens to the 1 or 2 billion regular websites that all get converted to mobile websites?
They're still there. I don't think desktop or laptop use is going away, right?
5 years from now, they'll all be there.
I can't tell you what's going to happen 5 years from now, but I do like this metaphor that Steve Jobs gives about tablets. So what he says to compare the tablet to the laptop, he sort of uses this model of cars and trucks. Because the laptop is the truck. There's still lots and lots of trucks in the world. They're used to do lots and lots of work, but the vast majority of people own a car. And for him, the tablet is the car, and the laptop is the truck, at least in that model, right? So that's kind of the thing that I have in my head when I think about these transitions. It's not that anything ultimately dies, It's just that things get used for different things as new opportunities show up. Yeah.
You're talking about the software looking different on different platforms. How important is it that an app look the same or behave the same across, let's say, Android, Apple OS, or
Yeah, so I'm one of these people who believe that if you're going to take the time to create a native application for a platform, you should probably just stick to the conventions of that native operating system. A, it's going to be easier, and B, people will be able to take all the learnings that they have from using that OS and transfer it over to your app, so there's less of a learning curve. You can still do a certain amount of customization with it, like adjusting brand and look and feel and things like that. But a lot of the core interaction things, rethinking them, many times is a lot of work and custom development, and ultimately not really that useful. There are some exceptions to that for sure, but in general, that seems to be a good way to go. Yeah.
Do you have any examples of really innovative service design happening on mobile devices?
Sure. Uber. You heard of the Uber taxi service? So finding a cab is a pain in the arse, right? And so what they have is they have a mobile application and a network of car drivers. And what you can basically do is push a button when you're a member and say, I'm here. And then you see the cab coming on the map to you. When it arrives, you can pay them using that application. You can rate them. They can rate you. So it's taking, a service of getting a ride and using the mobile environment to totally change it. Another example founded by some ex-Yahoos that I know quite well is GigWalk. And what they're doing is giving people small jobs using their smartphones. Like go in and photograph this restaurant for services like Yelp or Microsoft. And they go and actually do jobs using the mobile device as sort of a mobile workforce. And they could be used for getting petitions, getting data, what have you. All you have to do is push some mobile interactive forms or something, or inputs to anybody that has that app, and you can get stuff done. There's a lot of examples. Anyone else? Yeah, back there.
Thanks for talking about that.
Thanks.
I was just curious if you could shed some light on international usage for trends for smartphones, and in particular, feature phone usage. Do we expect the whole world to go smartphone by X date, or do you think feature phones have a long-term home?
Yeah, so there's...
And if we do also, does it even make sense to extend mobile first to sort of logical extreme and think about feature phones?
Yeah. So if you want universal access, you probably want to include feature phones in there. I'm a lot more pragmatic and not utopian, which is I've seen way too much money squandered trying to get into carrier decks and relationships with browsers that have crappy WAP support or what have you. And frankly, people just don't use that. They don't use the web on there. They don't use those applications. If you have a feature phone, you're using it as a phone, and maybe you're doing text messaging. So if you want to reach that larger pool of people that have those kind of devices, I would much more strongly push people towards SMS solutions. Like a great example is what Twitter did with their fast follow feature. So with fast follow, you can just text to follow a certain account, and bam, you're up and running through SMS. You don't have to deal with anything. And so there's a lot of opportunity with feature phones. I just don't think it's the same kind of opportunity that you have with smartphones. That's part one to your answer. And then part two is if you look at the trend right now, the smartphone becomes the feature phone really darn soon. It's like sub $100. The components are getting cheaper and cheaper. So it's just a matter of time before it proliferates more and more markets. And the third part of your question, because you asked a lot of questions actually, is there are very different regional usages in terms of what devices are popular. For example, in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, or Holland in general, but Amsterdam in particular, where I was just recently, the teenage population uses BlackBerries because of this ping service, which is essentially free text messaging. And so that is a very dominant platform in that region because of that particular service. In a couple Southeast Asian countries, BlackBerry is really big because their messenger service really took off, and a lot of people use messaging to connect with them. So depending on what your global strategy is, those are factors to definitely take into consideration. And it's not the same picture that it is in the US everywhere. Yeah?
Do you think this Windows Nokia thing is a good thing to bet on? Do you think it's going to get any
Nokia makes a hell of a lot of devices. Microsoft.
They don't really distribute them in the States, though.
Oh, in the States, no. I don't like to predict things. If you look at the current market numbers, however, you can see that Windows Phone 7 is not doing very well. But Nokia is still, or at least last time the numbers were tallied, is still the largest device manufacturer of phones in the world. Microsoft is still a giant powerhouse. And a couple of years ago, you could reliably say that when Microsoft gets into a space, 4 years later they are a dominant player. That has held true for a number of things that they've gotten into.
This is like year 3, I guess?
This is year 3, but I think that theory has been disproven by things like the web, right? So they are on like year 5 of search, and they're getting there, actually. I mean, they're close to being number 2, if not number 2 already. So that's my Microsoft theory. Give them 4 years, and whatever means necessary, they will achieve an objective. But that has been becoming less and less true over the recent history. Yeah, way back. What do I think about three-dimensional images in terms of the ones we have now, or like future product? Yeah. When it's commercialized, I'll take note of it. Currently not really a technology that's in consumers' hands, right? So I don't do anything with it yet. There's all sorts of patents and really interesting things that are out there, like touch gestures on the back of the device, sort of ghost fingers. It's been talked about for a while. There's actually camera-based interfaces that can detect where your finger is above the phone, so you can use gestures around it. Also not really commercialized yet. Pico projectors, really tiny embedded projectors, are also a very interesting capability that's constantly being talked about but hasn't made it to market. And there's a lot of stuff that's in that kind of state, right? OLED displays, bendable displays, high retina display, glasses, and images that are connected to the device, so you can sort of broadcast. Many of these things are proven in labs, but not yet consumerized. So very exciting stuff to come, hopefully, but who knows when and how. Yeah?
With very global context and all the assumptions that go along with prioritization of user context, can you speak a little towards our good guidelines for when the assumption misses when it's off?
Yeah.
Or do you just have to wait until you get back to your desktop to get that piece of information? It's there, but it's not accessible.
Right. So my approach to this is your service is the same regardless of what device. And the core value of your service is the same regardless of what device. You'll also find that people expect to do everything that they can do on the desktop on the mobile to a degree. So not allowing them to do things until they get to another device long term is kind of a failing solution. The other thing that you find really quickly is people will just pick up the device closest to them because it's easiest. So the Kindle's got an okay web browser. I just need to look up an article. That's the thing on the couch near me. I'm just going to do it on there, right? So this idea of shifting and changing what you do and how you do it based on some presumed context is probably not a good long-term solution. That said, there are, I believe, 3 things that, or maybe 4 things that really influence how you change UI. So one is input. Primary input mode. A remote input with up, down, left, right is very different from a touch-based input, which is very different from a mouse-based input. That influences design. Average screen size between in a networked TV, kind of a wall-size display, a palm-size display, a lap-size display also influences UI and interaction design significantly. And then the third thing is sort of user posture. And what I mean by that, if you're on the couch 10 foot leaning back, that's a different kind of experience than when you're sitting at a desk for an extended period of time or something that you're operating kind of in whatever circumstances in your hand. So those factors really influence how you present those content and services, which can change the interface, but the value of those content and services and the features and functions probably doesn't change that much between devices. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're seeing a lot of that. I mean, it's a very interesting time to be doing design. I can think of a number of examples. So Lion is one example where they basically took what they learned from the tablet and strongly applied that to the desktop. The new Windows 8 supposedly is a lot like that. It's taking a lot of mobile. And this is funny because it's kind of a mobile-first sort of trajectory, right? Do the mobile version, bring it back to the desktop. Netflix, who I mentioned before, recently did some testing where they figured a bunch of things out on connected TVs, and then they transferred this over to the website. And there's people that are kind of upset about what they did because they made things big and interactive, but in their testing, it actually proves out to be better. So I think you will see these cross-proliferation things happen, and the more interesting thing is the blurring between device classes, right? So 3.5-inch smartphone, okay, 5-inch smartphone, 7-inch tablet, 10-inch tablet. Where do you draw the lines and how? It's really unclear. And then when you get to a 10-inch tablet, okay, well, that's a 13-inch netbook, or is that actually a laptop at 15 inches, 17? Who knows? This is all stuff to be figured out, and that's why it's exciting still. Okay, thanks. I'll hang out up here if anybody wants to talk more, but I appreciate you coming out.
Thanks everyone for coming. We'll be around if you want to chat with any Ning employees here. He'll be around too, so if you have any more questions, he can get those answered for you. Hopefully you all join our meetup group, but if not, definitely do that, and that way you'll stay tuned for upcoming meetups we have. And if you guys have any meetup ideas or you'd like to present on something, please let me know. My name is Jason, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Thank you. Lots more food.